Okay, let's get started. So, this is a pricing in the news episode. This is kind of a recap of 2024. So, I thought it would be good to go through some of the pricing related topics that have been in the headlines throughout the year. We could do kind of like two categories. We've got like highlights. This could include deals. There's some things I want to talk about with IPOs, and then low points throughout the year. Talk about taking the L. How's that? Like people that I don't, it's hard. I don't want to call them like losers. I think these people will recover, but we'll talk about companies that kind of took the L in different ways throughout the year, and then lessons and takeaways from these things that happen. Sound good?
Do it.
All right, let's start with companies that took the L. So first category is CEOs that stepped down. Starbucks, Boeing, Nike, and Intel, just as like a sampling. This is from Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. This data point says Andy Challenger said there was a 19% increase in CEOs stepping down this year. Each of these obviously has its own like very distinct story. I was thinking about Starbucks just because we revisited them a lot this year. So you've got like kind of Howard Schultz's whole thing throughout all the years was like no discounting. They were always like pretty hard on that. And then you had this new guy come in 2022 and they ran a ton of promotions. Now this new Chipotle guy is kind of back on no promotions. So just given we've talked about this one a lot, what's your takeaway from their journey?
I think from my perspective, Starbucks is in a little bit of a inflection point. I think the industry in itself is in a bit of an inflection point, and they need to kind of understand what their overarching strategy is. And I think that's what's missing is they don't know what they want to be in this new world yet. And I think that the circular effect of CEOs is kind of contributing to that issue. So I think the market's getting fragmented. I think there's a lot of players coming in. I think in the larger cities, neighborhood coffee shops are still holding their ground. Starbucks is still popular. There's no doubt about it. But I think it needs another sort of some type of, I don't want to say a new product introduction, but some type of a redo of their business model in order to go to the next sort of life cycle of the market. And I think they haven't figured that out. They're stuck in that world, the old world of traditional coffee shops. So they kind of recreated the market when they first entered. They've ridden the wave, and I think that market is kind of maturing at a rapid rate. And I think they're looking for the next curve, and they haven't figured it out. And I think they will, but they're not quite there yet.
For each of those companies, there seemed to be like some sort of a fundamental shift in the market that the operations of those companies that you had named didn't fully keep up with. So in the Starbucks example, Jeet put it really well, and I would argue that a really similar argument could be made for Nike. And I think we talked about it on a podcast in the past where Nike had grown up being this running shoes company. They were touting the image, and in recent steps, they've moved away from that. And at the same time, there's been these new competitors that have come in, right? A lot of new running shoes that people are coming in, and that's kind of changing the market. Their value is not quite what it was. And then the same could be said about Intel, right? There's a new competitor that came in. NVIDIA is getting a massive amount of press, and the performance of what they are offering is changing the market and the differential value of what Intel is offering. So then the question is, I think that same thought process could be that Jeet articulated could be applied to the breadth of those companies, which is now that the market has changed, either because of a competitor or changes in their buyer preferences, whether it's consumer or on the B2B side, what really is their vision and how are they going to continue to differentiate? Because that differential value that they had isn't quite what it was over time. And you're seeing that, and it's the result of some level of customer dissatisfaction where these CEOs are starting to kind of get ousted.
Yeah, and that's where I was heading too. It's, I guess, not to even mention those companies, but I do think it's a market shift. But more broadly, the stat you just gave, Tracy, about 20% higher CEO turnover.
Yeah.
I feel like there's, what got you here won't get you to the next step. Or think of it this way, markets at highs, the expectation to deliver continued growth from here is going to be really hard. So I think there's individual industries that are changing, but there's also almost a cash out perspective. And it's interesting to think about, you have a little bit of turnover where sometimes it seems like no rhyme or reason, or then Howard Schultz comes back or Bob Iger comes back. Disney's an interesting case because I think Bob Iger, they just announced his succession plan, someone who knows the company well, and it's going to be like a 1.5 year runway or 2 year runway. until that turnover happened. So it'll be a little less disruptive, and the market didn't seem to mind, and their stock has actually done pretty well. Whereas I think some of these other boards are reacting a little bit more in a knee-jerk reaction to just, hey, our performance didn't cut the mustard this last quarter, so you're out.
Just, because now we're broadening the conversation beyond Starbucks. I do think I wanted to bring up Intel and talk a little bit about Intel because it's close to home for me. One, because I live in Phoenix and Intel's got a pretty large presence here. And two, my background's in semiconductors, right? And I worked at Intel. So Intel is one of those things where they have fundamentally, I think they're the biggest losers, to use Tracy's terminology, in the market out of all the people that we're talking about here. And the reason is they completely missed the boat. They totally missed the boat. It wasn't just, this moment in time, and it wasn't just because of NVIDIA. It wasn't because of AI. It wasn't because of any of these one-time occurrence. Their strategy, if I look back to when I worked there under Moore's Law and how fast they were innovating, how quickly they were turning the market, and how they were entering the market through the PC world and riding that boom, all of those things, they were right on top of the market and leading the market. And in the last 15 years or so, they kind of took themselves out of that leadership position. And it created room for all of these companies to come back in. And you see every single one of the semiconductor stock, besides Intel, pretty much everyone is doing well. So if you look at yourself and you're like, wow, of course, even if you take NVIDIA out of it, right? NVIDIA, we know it's a unicorn right now in their performance. But even if you take them out, you look at AMD. AMD used to be sort of a distant competitor to Intel when I started working there in the early 90s. It was nowhere. I mean, it's a joke to call them a competitor. And now AMD is running laps around Intel. And Intel can't figure out whether they're going to be a manufacturer of chips or whether they're going to go into software or whether they're going to go into some type of IP building that's within their sort of world right now. So they can't figure out who they are. They don't know their identity. And the market is hammering them because they don't know their identity. And I think that is the problem with Intel, and I think they are the biggest losers. Followed closely, in my opinion, by Nike. But I think Nike is going to be able to rebound because they had one misstep through the last CEO that didn't understand what the Nike brand was. And again, they didn't understand the market, to Adnan's point and Pete's. They didn't understand consumers. They didn't understand market. And they made a misstep, and they're going to be able to recover from it. But I think Intel culturally, for 15 years, it's been a misstep. It wasn't one. And therefore, they get my L.
What do you think happens? Do you think it's a buyout for Intel? You think it's just total clean house and new people come in?
There are rumors that they're going to split into two companies. And I think they've announced some of it to the market that it's going to be two separate companies. They're going to take their manufacturing out. They've got fabs. The old CEO was pouring in even more billions of dollars into building new fabs and capacity. So I think they're going to try to take that piece out, and then they're going to take the IP in a separate direction. This is something that, they should have done a lot of this a long time ago. So they are behind and going to play catch up for probably the next 7-8 years. Just keep in mind, it takes a long time to build fabs. It takes a long time to keep up with technology. And, it's no longer just, a every year change in strategy type of world. It's tough to do that in semiconductors, and they completely missed the boat.
The other one that came up, I don't know if this is obviously not on the same scale, but if we just look at retail, Pete had sent an article about Target a while back. This was SeekingAlpha. Target is on the outside looking in on the retail trinity of Walmart, Amazon, and Costco. So these four companies, this was after the Q3 earnings for Target were a big miss, and these other companies are doing well, obviously. So it seems like part of the issue with Q3 for Target was like they bought too much and had to drop price to kind of recover. And then Walmart's just taking share from them because more people are willing to shop at Walmart, even if they're not probably like the original Target shopper for Walmart. So I don't know. Should we just talk about that, like those four companies more broadly first?
I guess my take is this. It's interesting that you talk about those four, and I think Target over the last 10 years did a pretty good job about being a little bit more design forward and targeting a little bit wealthier of a consumer, and their store experience was a little more comfortable. But I feel like in the past 2 years, all the other three they just have such massive supply chain infrastructure, and the impact of on inflation, they're able to mitigate a little bit more. And then there was kind of all those headlines about, wealthier people are shopping at Walmart now, or all the people with six-figure salaries are now, downshifting to Walmart and moving away from Target or other retailers. And I don't think Target has that reputation of sort of competing in the same way. Costco is interesting because it's always sort of been the in bulk, affordable place, but it's the cool place. You can always go get your $1.50 hot dog and soda. So anyway, I feel like it's kind of like the antithesis of all the bad news on inflation. Costco is probably very well positioned, and then even the other Walmart, obviously, as well.
From what I recall from reading a little bit about Target, is it was a miss in terms of their operations and forecasting demand, where they had purchased too much, they didn't anticipate how much people were going to buy, and then went out with the message of saying, "Hey, we are going to drop prices. We're going to be inflation friendly." Partially because of the message itself, but also because they didn't forecast demand appropriately, resulting in them dropping prices. So I think that demand planning was also playing a part of it. The piece that I'm a little bit curious about, and I didn't see reference, was the channel shift, meaning that is perhaps Walmart's growth due to the strength of their online presence. And all these stores have it, but I've personally seen Walmart touting that, pushing that a little bit heavier via partnerships and such. Whereas I've not quite seen the same thing with regard to Target. So I am a little bit curious about how aggressively Walmart is trying to go direct head to head with Amazon by pushing that online presence, and if that's impeding perhaps Target success.
If we're comparing those four, it just seems like Target is so much smaller than the other three, first of all.
Oh, yeah.
Like magnitude wise, so much smaller. So I don't know how you can compare the four. And I agree with Pete that, Target had found its comfort niche. But I do think, Walmart, Costco, others have kind of come into that Target market. And I think it has kind of diminished that shininess of Target, because their performance in their stock, I think the article had a little graph of, their performance, and Target's been doing poorly for the last 2 years. So it's not like, hey, this recent activity of what Pete pointed out of, hey, they overpurchased and now they have to lower the price. That's what's wrong. Nothing else is wrong with Target. I don't think is the case. I think they have a business problem. They have a business problem, and Amazon, Walmart, and Costco are kind of chewing up that issue that they're having. They're taking advantage of the issue that Target is having. I think that consumer buying behavior is Target is no longer aligned with their strategy to that consumer buying behavior, and you're seeing that degradation in the last 2 years, and it's going to continue until they make some fundamental changes.
I mean, based on that, it's kind of putting them in the bucket of the previous companies we were talking about, similar to the Starbucks example, right? Like, what really is your true strategy? What's going to be your differentiator? And then how's that going to play in the market, given the fact that the market has shifted?
Yeah, that's right. The only nuance would be, I would argue that Starbucks is leading the pack in being ahead of the market, while Target is, again, because of its magnitude, it's really in the fourth position by far. I think Walmart is 600 or 700 billion, and Target is 150 or something. I don't know. It's a much smaller number. It is a different position, which means they have different levers that they can utilize in order to solve this problem that they're having.
Yeah, the Starbucks competitive advantage is very much scale, whereas the inverse is true for Target, right? They want to find that niche that they play in.
That's right. Which has pluses and minuses on both sides. There are pluses and minuses, right? It's just about how you take advantage of those.
It's also, I forget the stat, but there was some change in the last approximately year where a much larger percentage share of internet search traffic than you would anticipate is going through Amazon. Basically, people are learning about products by just searching for it there. That's even relative to Google. And Amazon's obviously got the infrastructure. Then Costco has, like, with their distribution center model, almost like, kind of bigger, fewer stores, people are accustomed to ordering online. That's how I get my Costco orders. I think Target's just so behind the eight ball, obviously with Walmart Plus and everything they've invested there, and acquisition of Jet.com, which maybe underperformed, but there's just been, I think there's just a huge moat in its capital, and Target hasn't invested in the online channel in the same way the other three have.
Yeah.
I do have to give, we're kind of talking about, I have to give Walmart a lot of credit. And because they, there was this people of Walmart, there's all these sort of memes and all this sort of stuff about stigma about going in and shopping at Walmart. They really have done a nice job in the last couple of years of kind of changing that brand around a little bit, and offering different types of, influencers to peddle some of the products that they have, and the products that they have has gone up in quality of what they're trying to sell, what they're trying to push, and they've really built that online presence. Yeah. And they've done a great job of building that online presence, which is really, they have started catching up with Amazon and how much they've invested in that strategy, and it's really paid off for them for the last couple of years. So they should get a lot of credit for what they've been able to do and how they've turned that brand image around in the last couple of years.
Like a Logan Roy moment, turning a tanker.
Yeah.
Other one, Spirit Airlines. We just look at the airline industry broadly, but Spirit filed for bankruptcy after the attempted merger with Frontier. And then United is actually doing very well. So there's a lot of different parts to the airline industry and the players there, but that was an interesting storyline throughout the year with the merger and then the bankruptcy and now kind of the aftermath and what's going to happen there.
Sticking to Spirit first, I'm still not sure why that merger didn't go through. I thought the reason for the merger not to go through was complete garbage. I think we do need airlines at different levels. Even though I don't like flying Frontier or Spirit, I do when I need to. Given the rates that they have great rates. And maybe I'm going for a weekend and backpack is all I need, and that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think there's a need and for consumer choices at all the different levels, but that merger would have helped with that instead of not going through it. Therefore, you're now losing a company that has that capability to give you that service at that level. So I just really didn't understand it whatsoever. I understand why and how they are struggling. I think any of those low cost providers are going to struggle. It's just tough to compete against the big, the big three or big four that's there in the US. I think it's really, really tough being a small provider and being able to compete. By the way, just as a footnote, Southwest is changing some of their strategy, right? Yep. They're going to try to move towards assigned seats now and things like that. So, if you look at, Southwest price, again, being in Phoenix, they hit a little close to home, but their prices aren't the lowest anymore. They're now banking on a brand that has a loyal following to be able to kind of take advantage of that. So it's just really, I think the airline industry needs to get revamped a little bit, and maybe United is the right one to lead the way.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Spirit and Frontier, I'm not terribly familiar with the regulatory environment, what led to the denial of the merger, but in my eyes, the key is that being that low-cost provider, unless they have some sort of real cost advantage out there, it's really tough to play into that market, because if they were to gain traction as a result of them going up and offering the lowest ticket prices in exchange for paring back value in a way that they've done, what's to stop any of the major airlines from doing the exact same thing? And you're seeing elements of that with airlines offering things like economy basic and things like that, right? That's kind of their version. So then if that's the case, and then these other bigger players have the advantage of scale, kind of similar to what we were talking about with Amazon, Walmart, et cetera, then how do you really play in that market unless you have, again, some type of an advantage that the big guys don't? But it's hard to imagine that they would, just given the fact that these big players have been around for so long.
Yeah, Edna, to your point, I don't know if this is true, but you could imagine historically maybe they try to cram, like the low cost carriers sort of cram people in like sardines, but if you've flown at all in the last few years, it's like packed to the gills everywhere. So that competitive advantage or that lever is probably gone. I'm sure
Right.
Spirit and Frontier, they could load the plane, but so is everybody else. So it's not like they can just sell more. And yeah, it's interesting, like the different tiers of service that are offered on even Frontier. I flew them recently because kids fly free, and they had nonstops to a city I wanted to go to. I wanted to go nonstop to Boston, and it worked. Or sorry, to Buffalo from Denver, and they had an option. But yeah, they even have different tiers of reserve seats or front of the plane or what have you. Whereas Spirit has all the a la carte fees, but I really don't see them having the different options for people that would potentially pay more for a better experience. So I think that's probably, it's tough. It's like you need to be low cost, but if everybody offers a low cost experience and you don't even have something that can differentiate you, it's a tough place to be. There's just not the scale to spread that. I think that's a really astute observation.
I mean, part of my reaction was I heard kind of that bankruptcy is like, don't most airlines go bankrupt at some point in any case?
Oh
Like,
yeah, like
kind of just par for the
every
course.
5 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Like, does someone else bring it out of bankruptcy and keep it as Spirit, or does JetBlue just say, "Oh, well, we can buy the remaining assets for pennies on the dollar, and this just saved us a lot of money"?
The other thing I would imagine we'll still see play out too is like these fun little improvements over time, like Shake Shack on Delta. Like, what are all the ways that they can add these things in that people go, ooh, that's a cool thing that only this airline, not that that's going to really be that much of a decider, but it could help. All right, let's talk about some wins. So IPOs, high level, it says there's been a 36% increase in initial public offerings compared to 2023. So there are 210 companies that went public this year. It's still well below 2020 and 2021 activity, but there were some interesting standouts for this, especially Reddit, which we talked about a bunch. So let's talk about Reddit a little bit, and then maybe we can take a step back and talk more broadly. But since I already brought it up, so Reddit, first of all, their return is 379% since their IPO. A couple days ago, they announced a new AI search tool called Reddit Answers. So it seems like potentially this could be an interesting disruption to Google, which is already like with GPT and advancements with AI already, there are some changes underway, but their search tool is kind of building off of, they've got 100 million daily users on Reddit. We've talked about like this as an opportunity, especially for user generated content of training LLMs. They've got their deal with Google, which I think it was around 60 million per year to access to the data. So there's so many different things with that, but I wonder if search is in an ongoing, like kind of changing environment with this whole thing. But they've definitely got like kind of the broadest library of user generated content and is continuing to grow.
I find it pretty fascinating, just kind of given the evolution. And I think we might have even talked about this a while ago when Gen AI was first kind of coming out. And I think one of the challenges that Reddit and many other companies, X being one of them, highlighted was that as a result of generative AI coming out, they're getting a lot of calls because a very significant amount of the content that generative AI is using to get answers comes from places like Reddit, X, etc. So now they're incurring this cost of having to serve answers to these places, and they're not getting any benefit as a result of it. So then they started this model of say, hey, we're going to fence off our content. We're going to develop an API. We're going to charge people. And then there's a very negative public reaction in that case because there were other sources aside from generative AI that were using it for really meaningful things, meaning like higher education institutes and things like that. And it was to the point where it was unaffordable for them. So now they're coming out, and based on your description, what I'm hearing is Reddit's coming out and saying, hey, you know what, we're going to take our content and we're going to fully monetize it ourselves. And that way we can realize the benefit. It's within our ecosystem. If we choose to put it in such a way where, we get to generate incremental ad revenue, or, in the future, perhaps you're charging some sort of a user-based fee for access to this content, right? That might be kind of a longer term thing or pie in the sky type of a thing. But point being that they are now in control as a result of what the rationale for people going to them in the first place, which truly is the content itself. In my eyes, the reason that somebody would use something like Google or any other tool to access Reddit content is just because it's a hell of a lot easier. The complaints that you often hear about Reddit is like, the content is great, but the interface, it's really hard to access the content. It's not intuitive. But now if they're able to bridge that gap, then that puts them, in my eyes, in a great position, because it gets back to what you often hear about the internet, where the content is really what makes it. And that seems, in my eyes, to be Reddit's competitive advantage.
Am I crossing wires here? But wasn't there a major change where there was a translation service that now you can kind of search Reddit threads in multiple languages internationally? And so basically you're getting how-to advice that you can translate into whatever language. So now it's just like, 10x the market size.
I have to do a little bit of research. So I think there's a layer of use case that we need to be cognizant about, because all the data is not all the data, right? So Reddit has content that's user created. So it has a lot of Q&A. So it's all user kind of based. So there is a little bit of a quality check, and there's a little bit of, is it real kind of thing that you have to kind of put onto the Reddit content. But Reddit, I don't think, has access to sort of the library of historical sort of books and knowledge and everything else that exists, right? It's all their user base. So I think there's a sort of an element of use case that's there. Because if let's say both Google and Reddit had the same exact skin to go search, you're searching on two distinct things. It's not the same thing. So you can't do the same search both places and just compare the output of both of those, because it's just two different things. So you're comparing an apple to an orange, it's not the same thing. So I think the question then becomes, then which one has the higher valuation of, what your need is, and how you get it. So in my opinion, you go to where you need to go to get the answer that you need. So if I have a question of, hey, how do I change out my RO system in my house? I'll probably go search a few Q&A on Reddit. That's what I usually do, and see if somebody said something that resonates with me. Hopefully it's true. Then I go to YouTube, try to see some videos on it. And then I go to Google, I try to do some searches on it. So I'm using multiple sort of search engines for different reasons in order to solve a problem that I have, which then begs the question, is there some layer that could happen in the future that aggregates all these different, systems together, so we can have a personalized sort of Q&A? And maybe that's part of the AI engines. Maybe that's part of the bots that are there, but it needs to have access to everything in order to give you a answer that's going to be applicable for what you're looking for. So I think there's other complexities. I think this is still in the dust mode. So Reddit's trying to figure out how to monetize their world. It's got a lot of value based on user created, content that's there. And then Google still is the behemoth powerhouse that's still there for a lot of different reasons. And then you've got YouTube and others that are there as well for their use cases. We are in line for an incredible boom when it comes to modernization of old industries. So I would put Starbucks in that category. I would put Subway and, the recent, I think you sent this out also, Tracy, the acquisition of, what is it?
Jersey Mike's.
Jersey Mike's, and all of those things, because I think there's a modernization that's there. So we're going to see, I think, a lot more robotics go in. We're going to see a lot more sort of pure modernization from our sort of QSRs, the quick serve restaurants, things like that. We're going to see a little bit more. We're going to see a lot more activity with AI, not the buzzword of AI, but the application of AI. How are you using AI to drive efficiency and modernization? I think that one is also going to be there. So you are, I think, going to see a lot more PE activity, VC activity, based on what Adnan said, because our top 1% of the 1% is not going anywhere. In fact, they're accumulating wealth at a much greater rate than all of us peons that are there. So that those dollars are definitely going to be there. So that those dollars are going to be invested in a lot of these modernizations. And then they're going to want that bump, and they're going to want that exit. And it'll be interesting to see how they choose to do that exit, right? Because there is a lot of ways to add value through automation, through modernization, through the AI application. But then what's the exit for them is a question that I have in my head, that, that I think about public funds, public ways of doing it. That's absolutely one strategy. But there could be other strategies that are out there.
The other category, this is kind of a subcategory of wins, I suppose, is near misses. I was just thinking about Project Titan and Apple pulling the plug on that whole business unit and how badly that could have gone. This could be like its own category of wins throughout the year. That was in February. Feels like 10 years ago. But we talked about it on the podcast because they reallocated all those resources into AI at the beginning of the year. Could have gotten very, very, very expensive and messy to try to keep moving into that car business. But are there other things that you can think of just in terms of decisions that could have been worse, smart decisions that saved companies strategically throughout the year?
Didn't Apple also backtrack a little bit on their
the Vision Pro?
Vision Pro?
Yeah, it reminds me of, I mean, it wasn't this year, it was in the last 2 years, but just Meta's, exit from the metaverse. They were dumping like 10 billion a year or whatever it was. And then once they stopped doing that, the market was like, great, we'll 5x your stock.
I do think it's amazing how good we are when we want to be. Meaning we still remember this like ChatGPT coming out, and it felt like Google was so far behind. You felt like all these companies were so far behind. And now, how many AI, windows do we have open on our PCs to look for different information and ask it to do different things for us, right? And it's just amazing how fast everybody kind of pivoted from some of these other projects to really double down into this. And now they're like looking for the next leap. So it's really, this year was a foundational year for us in a lot of different ways when it comes to that vertical. And I think next year is going to be the wild, wild west when it comes to the application of some of these things.
Should we talk about that? Like some predictions for next year? Wild west of application. That's a good one. Other categories or thoughts of how things are going to evolve?
Yeah, I mean, since I brought it up, I mean, for me, I think the biggest area is going to be personalization. We actually talked about it a little bit in some of our blogs and some of the writing and everything. The speed to which we can understand individuals and what their needs are at any given moment in time, and to cater and tailor offers and promotions and how they pay and all of those things to that individual's needs. I think that level of precision and personalization is going to be sort of the direction that we move towards. And I think next year we're going to see a lot of tools come up for the consumer to help them shop better, do better, to kind of make sense of sort of this fragmented world of so many choices, so many ads, so many promotions. I think we are going to see a little bit more consumer-based, personalized, applications that are going to be out there.
I'll just have a hot take in sort of our, professional services industry. I think not just personalization, but all of the AI tools, knowledge has never been more accessible to people. So I think a lot of the more commoditized tasks that might happen that you might outsource now with more productive individuals or the same size footprint in a given company can do more. So I think where I see advisory and professional services being is more on how do you guide the strategy? How do you integrate these tools, or kind of the gray beard or experience type projects where you help folks use all of these new capabilities as opposed to providing the more commoditized capability. And I don't think that means the professional services industry will shrink. Quite the opposite. I think there's just going to be more and more and more use cases, but where you plug in is going to start to shift kind of higher in the value chain a little bit.
One of the things that I think is going to be interesting for me to see is kind of piggybacking on the topic of AI and perhaps that level of personalization, how they go to market. I find really fascinating, right? When ChatGPT first came out, they get, in essence, the free version, and then you had the pro version, which around $20 a month, and just now they came out with a version that's kind of super powered and $200 a month. Point being that they're starting to better understand their audiences, better able to communicate the value and assign value to the different packages they have, presumably based on use cases. But in my mind, those use cases are just so massive that for ChatGPT and a lot of different competitors out there, it's going to be really interesting to see what their go-to-market model is, and how they're looking at the range of customers that they have, and then how they choose to monetize, right? What is their segmentation strategy so they can fully monetize the value of their offerings now that they're starting to prove it out a little bit. Everybody's gotten a bit of a taste of it. So that's going to be, it's going to be a change. I'm going to be fascinated to see what that change entails.
All right, what was your other one, Jeet?
My other one is healthcare, just personalized healthcare, all driven off of, it's funny to see how far we've come in healthcare. Like when I started working, everything was paper-based for healthcare. Everything was in drawers and files. Nothing was sort of digitized. So we had the first boom in healthcare was, how do you digitize things? And then we kind of moved into the world of, what do you do with some of the digitization of content? Are you allowed to share between physicians? Are you able to share between hospital systems? Can it be national? In the way we compile data, we're still there. We're stuck there. We're not there yet. But there's some individual healthcare things that are popping up that's allowing us to take a little bit more control in a privatized way of our healthcare, of our labs, results, things like that. I think there's going to be a huge boom in combining our activity score that we get, sleep score, workout score, things like that, with our lab scores, with our everyday, what we're doing from a walk, from a eating, consumption based, all of those things put together to create sort of predictive models of what's going to be a healthy day, what's going to be, oh, you're tired, and then being prescriptive and you need to do ABC today. You need to do this to extend that longevity. I think there's something there that is going to be a big, big deal for us moving forward, to make things a lot more prescriptive for us to extend our lifespan.
There are more opportunities in that personalization track too. All right, cool. Let's stop there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, cool, guys. See you soon.
See ya.
Bye.